Hello, I'm Wendy. Today I'm painting watercolour Christmas cards with lots of festive berries. This is the demo painting I did, and you'll see in this video how I cropped it to make different compositions to fit different sized aperture cards. You'll also see how I crop paintings like this to stick onto regular cards as well. I know some people, especially in the States, do have problem finding these aperture cards, so you'll see how you can overcome this, and I'll show you all that later on in the video. So here are a few of my practices, if you like, trying to work out a tutorial, doing the berries and a few leaves behind. I was fretting a little bit about greens because I know people have awful trouble mixing greens, or you can have, I know that. And so I was using different sorts of greens to try and work out the best one. But in the end, they all looked quite the same. And what I realised was it doesn't really matter what greens you use for this particular project. The most important thing is that you have a range of tones of the greens. So you'll see later on in the video that you're going to mix a very light green, a medium green, and a very dark green, and you might even use a little bit of black if you need to darken those greens for the final few strokes, which gives the contrast in the picture, which is what you're looking for. I worked my designs to fit an 8cm square. That was the largest aperture card that I had, and it was the size that would fit my regular cards as well, if I cut out the picture. I used a very soft pencil, about a 2B or a 4B, to put in the berries. Now, if you're going to do these cards, you can copy the design I've got and place them as I'm doing, but just suit yourselves and maybe look at some references, and you can place the berries wherever you like. This seemed to work quite well. The berry diameter was about 1 centimetre or a little bit less. This card is more about the berries than the leaves, so you don't want to make them too small. And then I just gave myself an approximation of the size I wanted to paint the picture. The next stage was putting on the masking fluid here, as you can see, and I'll give you a link to how to put on masking fluid if you're not sure, and a link below to the type of masking fluid that I use. You can see here that I've actually done a little bit of pencil work on the areas where I wanted some leaves. It's important not to fill the whole square with your leaf painting, so leave some areas that are going to be left as white paper. So just suggest somewhere where the leaves are going to go. You can see it a little bit better now where I've got the close-up. So you can see I've got sort of leaf areas of varying sizes, and it's very, very rough. And as you saw from the ones that I did at the beginning, all my test ones, it doesn't really matter. It's a bit like mixing the greens. It doesn't really matter as long as you leave those white spaces in there. And I also put on a few random strokes of masking fluid, holes where the birds can fly through if you like, in case I did overdo the leaf work. I got the greens ready, and for this particular picture I used yellow ochre. You could use raw sienna, with a very, very, very small amount of Prussian blue, which is really strong, for the lighter green, as you can see here. I used the same two colours for the mid-green, adding more of the Prussian. If you found that this got a little bit too cold, it's a very cold blue is the Prussian, then you could add a little bit of burnt sienna to the mix as well. The darkest green now, and that is the Prussian again, with some of the raw sienna or the ochre, and this time the burnt sienna, and this will give you a nice strong green. The more Prussian, the colder it is, the more of the burnt sienna, then the warmer it is. I wanted these paintings to have a sort of loose, spontaneous look to them, and in order to do that you've got to be quite free, do a bit of splattering. I started splattering with a bit of just water to start with, and as I was painting along, then I was doing some little bits of splattering, trying to get some different marks in there, and I worked wet into wet, keeping everything quite loose, or as loose as I could, but maintaining, as I stated sort of earlier on, those white spaces around the berries as well. If you don't do that, it's going to look a little bit like, you know, a square of wallpaper. So, but it is difficult maintaining those white areas, so it's practice, that's what it is. So you can see here that I'm working mainly wet into wet, and I'm adding those darker greens as I go on. I'm not worrying clearly about staying inside the lines of those marks that I made for the size of the card. I'm giving myself some wriggle room, so I'm going outside them in some places with some of the leaves. I added a bit of splattering as I went along, and also I added a little bit of the burnt sienna in places as well, just to sort of warm it up. I do find the Prussian blue does give me very cold greens, but then it did work very well against the red berries. So as I said at the beginning of the video, don't worry too much about your green mixes. In this case I've used Prussian. You could substitute cobalt blue, you could substitute ultramarine. Use your favourite green mixers. Just make sure you have a light, a medium and a dark. I would, if possible, avoid tube greens because you're looking for a natural green here, and the tube greens, unless you've got some experience, can look very unnatural when you're painting these sorts of things. So try and mix your greens with a yellow, a blue and a red. When you're working wet into wet like this, especially if it is pretty wet as I've got it here, it's very easy for all those colours to merge together and you end up with a similar colour and you're just not getting the different tones in there that you wanted. So, you know, this is really good practice for the wet into wet work, as well as getting some nice Christmas cards at the end of it. So do lots of them and experiment and see the best wetness and dryness and thickness of paint to get the effect that you want. As you can see here, I'm tending to add the very dark colours on the edges where you've got some paper that's dry, so the dark is sort of staying in place. It's all down to practice. And here I am working wet into wet most of the time, but on this particular painting there's no problem at all. You can work wet onto dry. If some of the areas are dry, you could paint on top of them. You'll get some nice effects doing that. I'll pop one up here and you can have a look at some of the effects I got when I was working less wet, if you like. But experiment, it's fun. It's really nice doing this. You can do lots of them. And you could have so many Christmas cards at the end of it as well. And it's doing your watercolour practice a lot of good, because it's no good you can watch videos, you can read books, but at the end of the day you've just got to do things. I mean, you saw how many I did to practice this. It didn't take that long. Oh, at this point in the video, I'm rambling, I added, heresy I know, tiny bit of black to that dark mix, just to bring out some of those dark areas, particularly around the red berries. So again, experiment with black. I think it was a lamp black, I'm not sure it matters. But just a tiny bit, especially if you're really struggling with getting those dark mixes. You can see it is quite effective. And remember when you're doing this, that watercolour always dries back about, I don't know, usually say about 30–40%. So be quite brave. And don't forget doing some of your splattering as well. When everything was dry, I added some splattering with some white gouache or any sort of opaque white. I did that before I rubbed off the masking fluid off the berries because I didn't want too much of that splatter work on the berries. You can leave it till later on, it's up to you. Again, it's all down to experimenting and see what works best for you. We can now have fun time painting the berries. I used cadmium red light for the first layer of colour and left that little white dot where the light is catching the berry, and then a darker sort of reddy orange to put a little bit of shadow side just to make them a little bit more interesting. You could use the cadmium red dark. You could add a little bit of alizarin to the mix. Again, we're back to experimenting. See what works for you, see what looks nice. I was working them wet into wet. You can see with a little bit of shadow on the side. Just makes the berries look a little bit more interesting. And here I'm using that black just to put the little black dots on the berries. What I found was I did put it on a little bit too dark, to be honest, and they did stand out too much. So just before it was dry, I just dabbed one or two with a tissue. So you get some variation there on the darks. You can add some interest to this by putting some branches through. I'm using a rigger. I'm mixing a dark with burnt umber and ultramarine, and just putting them through quite loosely. And you can see where those sort of bird holes, I don't know why I always call them that, but those little gaps in the leaves. You usually say that about trees, don't you? You leave white bits so the birds can fly through. But I mean, it's a similar thing here. It adds interest, and also you can see the little twigs going through them as well, and that really looks quite nice, I think. Don't be frightened of making them quite dark in places, but don't overdo it. Just put one or two of them on. Be a bit spontaneous with it. I felt it needed a little bit more splatter on there, so that's what I'm doing now. Just a tiny bit on the berries. It can be overdone, the splatter, particularly on the berries. You lose the, the nice red and everything. It gets too hidden, but again, experiment, see what you like. So now you want to work out the composition. You can be a little bit more flexible regarding this if you're going to cut out a square or any shape to stick onto a regular card. If you've got aperture cards, then you're a little bit more restricted, but place the aperture cards over them. You'll see in a minute me doing that. This is with just some little L sort of shapes that I've pulled out. But here you can see one of my smaller aperture cards, and then you can work out where you think is the best, where the composition is working best, and you'll probably find that it will be in the areas where you've left quite a bit of white on there. It does seem to work better. So here I'll show you some of the cards that I put together. The cards that I used were 5 inches by 5 inches, 12 centimetres by 12 centimetres. And the aperture on these cards was 3 inches by 3 inches, 8 by 8 centimetres. The card on the left was the painting that I demonstrated. Now these are regular cards, they're not aperture cards, and I cut out the design and stuck it on. Again, the card was 5 by 5 and the image was about 3 inches by 3 inches. But as I said in the video earlier on, you can be a little bit more creative if you like, and with your compositions on these cards you can cut them the size you wanted. And clearly, you can stick on the Happy Christmas stickers on the front or on the inside, and you could even go mad and put a bit of glitter on if you wanted. It's up to you. And finally we have these cards with a very small aperture. I think it's about 2 inches by 2 inches, the image there. These are very nice, I like them, and again you can put the Happy Christmas stickers on them. They're very useful if you've got yourself a painting that doesn't really work as well as you would like. It's very likely you'll have an area in there that is working well, and these little cards come in very handy. You can just pick out that nice little area. So have a go with these as well. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video and you learned something from it. I do have a Facebook group where you can show your work, and there's a link below in the description box. We've got quite a few members in there, but very few people are posting. I think everybody must be really shy. So come on, let's have some of these cards up there and let everybody see some of these lovely ideas that we've all been having for our Christmas cards. I'd really like that. Do subscribe to my channel if you like what I do and don't want to miss anything in the future, and you can also give me a thumbs up, which helps with the YouTube algorithm and all that nonsense. So I will see you next time. Not quite sure what I'm doing. Got lots of ideas, so I will see you then, and happy painting.